And welcome, everyone. Good afternoon to this latest in our series of Business Gateway webinars. Today, we're trying something a little bit different. Normally, we would have a panel, but today we're having what we're describing as a fireside chat with Roan Lavery. And I'll get Roan to introduce himself shortly. This one is very much part of our Scottish Startup Month, which has been a month-long campaign championing Scotland's entrepreneurial spirit and trying to inspire the next generation of business owners to take their first steps, which they can do with help from the free tools and advice and support services that we have within Business Gateway and indeed within other partners and players out there in the ecosystem. So this is very much a celebration of Scottish entrepreneurship and a chance to find out from FreeAgent, Roan's business, and be inspired by their journey and what they've done. So, a few housekeeping things. We're recording the session so that we can make it available afterwards to folks that perhaps couldn't make it. As I said, folks are all on mute to avoid background noise. You can, as Ali has put in the chat there, submit questions via the portal, and we will try and get to them if we can, although we've got quite a fair bit of ground to cover. And if you have any feedback, we'd very much welcome that. And a URL and code will be given in the chat box at the end to be able to do that. But without further ado, Roan, please, can I ask you to introduce yourself and tell us about FreeAgent, what you do?
Great, thanks, Hugh. So I'm Roan Lavery. Hugh said I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of a business called FreeAgent. We're based in Edinburgh. We're effectively a tech business, a fintech business, and we make accounting software for small businesses. It's what we call a SaaS subscription software business that you can sign up for, and allows you to your invoicing expenses, your accounts and taxes and sort of things like that. As I say, we're based in Edinburgh. We've been around since 2007, so like over 18 years now. So we've been around for quite a while. And there's a lot of water under the bridge, a lot of things that we can discuss over there, but there's been a big journey that we've been on. We're around 260, 270 staff now, most of whom are based in Edinburgh. We do have some other people who are remote around the rest of the UK, but we have our HQ in Edinburgh. Most people kind of like based there. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably a bit of an intro to myself and FreeAgent.
Brilliant, thanks, Roan. In terms, you've said there about the employees and kind of where they are. What about customers? Where are your customers? Is it international? Is it the UK? Is it Europe? Where are they?
Almost exclusively the UK. We do at various points in the past we have done more of an international push. That's a kind of story that we can talk about if you want. But we ended up really consolidating on the UK market. I mean, being an accounting and tax piece of software, legislation, the rules are very, very different as you go from country to country. So it is not as with maybe some other sort of like tech internet SaaS products where you're just building this thing and it's the same across multiple territories. You really have to sort of like build bespoke versions. And in the end, we just decided that we were going to focus on the UK market. So today, must be like 95, 98% of our customers are UK based.
Okay, no, that's really helpful to get a kind of handle on that. Obviously, as you've said there, you're no longer a startup. You have been around for 18 years. So you've been through all that, bought the t-shirt probably a few times. What inspired the creation of FreeAgent, and how did your personal experience shape the direction of what you've done?
Yeah, so back in the very, very early days, there was sort of like three co-founders, so myself, Ollie Heady, and Ed Molyneux. And it was actually Ed that had the original idea for FreeAgent. He was working as a contractor at the time. And so he'd recently become a contractor and he'd started trying to work with an accountant and understand his books and his accounts for the first time. He was really sort of, I guess, struggling with the process. And he'd originally from London, but he'd moved up to Scotland, and he'd had the idea for like, well, we could maybe build something where that would help him manage his finances and therefore be useful to other people. I was introduced to him. I met him in late 2006. I was doing some freelancing work at the time, so I was in a sort of similar position. And then, like a few months later, we met Ollie Heady, who became our CTO, and he was also contracting again down in London at the time. So all of us were in this position where we were one-person businesses having to do the work that we were doing in our jobs and at the same time manage our finances and all of that kind of sort of stuff. So it really was born out of that desire to do something that would help us initially. And then we started about, with building FreeAgent, and then we thought, right, okay, if it's useful to us, then hopefully it'll be useful to other people who are in a sort of similar position. I think it's worthwhile sort of maybe mentioning, holding hands up, like none of us actually had any experience of accounting. So we're not accountants. So we were really coming at this from, we want to build something that's as easy to understand so that we can understand it.
Yeah.
And then, other people in our position. And that was a little bit of a sort of, I guess, a different, approach from the traditional accounting software, which is very much built by accountants for accountants. So it was built for people with a really, really good understanding and a good knowledge of accounting and finance. Whereas we were really trying to sort of build something. I don't want to say it was dumbed down because it wasn't, but
Hmm.
something that was understandable and accessible and easy to learn. So that, primarily we could understand it and then hopefully other people as well. So it really was that sort of first-hand experience that drove us to create the product and the company.
Brilliant. You described it earlier as software as a service.
Yeah.
So you've admitted that the three of you didn't have that kind of knowledge of the accountancy. Were you software developers, or how did you develop that? How did that happen?
Yeah, so we were all working effectively, as techies, or whatever. I
Right,
was a web designer. I was more aligned with the sort of user experience and the design side of things, but I was a programmer as well. Ed and Ollie were both contracting as programmers.
right.
So Ed had a really interesting backstory. He was an RAF pilot. He left RAF, flew like Harrier jump jets, and when he left RAF, he contracted back into the Ministry of Defence as a programmer. And Ollie was working as a developer for a hedge fund down in London. So we were all technical to some degree.
Right.
Around that time, that sort of like 2006, 2007, that's when the software as a service was really just starting to kick off. So the idea that you could make quite complex software products and deliver them through like a web browser as opposed to download a piece of,
Mm-hmm.
or go into like PC World and buy a box or something. That was quite new at the time. And so, yeah, it was really us as much, exploring that idea and seeing how far we could get with it as much as anything.
Okay, no, that's really helpful to understand that. So technical expertise, and you've turned that into the idea and the business, recognizing, as you've said, that there was something needing to fill a wee gap in there. Right? That's great. So, was there a particular moment when you realized that free agent could actually become scalable as a business rather than just a useful tool? Was there a wee eureka moment where you went, "Oh, we've got
Um,
something here"?
I think with that, it's more a series of small moments that add up over time. So
Right.
when we started working, building the product together, late 2006, early 2007. We had maybe a beta version of the product available in the sort of early summer of 2007. And at that point, we'd launched something and just got some people using it for free. And that was, it's amazing because then you're getting, valuable feedback from customers.
Yeah.
You're hearing about their experience of the product. And we had, dozens, it wasn't lots, but we had dozens of people who used the product. And then at the end of the summer, we implemented payment for the first time. So, like we said, we're going to launch publicly. And most of the people that had been demoing the product then started paying us money.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the point where like, oh, right, okay, these people have been actually using this thing. They found it useful enough to then say, actually, I'm going to, pony up and actually start paying some money for this
Yeah.
product. I guess that's even though it was really small numbers, you're literally talking about a handful of customers. Just that idea of people are prepared to pay for this thing. I remember we get an email every time somebody subscribed because it's a subscription. That's the
Yeah.
business. So subscription. And every time that that somebody would subscribe, we would get an email. I mean, maybe get like one a day, but every time you got this email coming through, they'd be like, "What did you see? I just got an email coming through." Somebody's like, I know that was this huge deal that somebody
Yeah.
was actually prepared to pay like whatever it was, £15 a month for the thing that you built. Which is, given how early stage this product was, and I guess that's the type of thing where you're like, okay, maybe this is going to be more than just something that's useful for us. Maybe we can scale this to other people.
So, how long would you say it then took to get from that early stage to a sustainable business in terms of the numbers of customers subscribing and giving you the cash flow that you needed to keep going? How long did that take?
I mean, but that took about like 17 years. So I'll explain that in a bit more detail. Um, we built in those early days, we had a very, very small handful of customers. And for the first couple of years, um, we were still working as either contractors or still working as freelancers. Free agent was like a side hustle, it
Right.
was building, at weekends, at evenings, it was something that we did, aside of our day jobs. In early 2009, that's when we took our first round of investment. And that's when we quit the day jobs, and that's when we really started focusing on free agent full time. Now, it was a really small amount of money, certainly by today's standards of investment, but it was enough money for us just to pay ourselves just a little bit. But, we were by no means profitable. And, that comment I made was it took us a long time to become profitable, which is maybe what you're sort of like asking there
Yeah.
as a business. And that's not unusual for tech companies. It wasn't 17 years, it was a bit less than that. But we did do numerous other rounds of investment over the years. We did like lots of angel rounds, we did VC rounds, we did crowdfunding. We were one of the first ever businesses to do like a sort of B2B crowdfunding. We took the company public, we did an IPO. So we went public on the AIM market. So there was lots of investment rounds that we were doing. And the sort of thinking behind when you're raising money is, okay, you're going to raise this money, and then you're going to scale the business in some capacity. Usually that means hiring more people, right? Usually means growing the team. And that usually means that you're loss making as a business because you're scaling your costs and your overheads, but your revenue hasn't caught up yet. But that additional capacity in scaling a business then allows you to grow revenue quicker. But you would go through those points of like, raise some money, scale the business, raise some money, scale the business, and do it like that. So that was the sort of approach that we took.
So you spoke there about how you got some investment, and that was the point that you guys made that decision. Right, we're giving up
Yeah,
the real job, and we're going to do this now. So that would have been, imagine, a very tough decision
it
to
was.
make.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say were the other toughest decisions that you had to make in those early years, and how did that shape the journey?
Yes, I mean, I think that was. I mean, so I think that one was definitely one of the first. It was made even more scary. But we all had like young children at the time. My eldest daughter was born in 2007. Ollie, his first son was born in 2007. Ed. So we all had like
Wow.
essentially like children that were born at the time the company was formed as well. So we were
Yeah.
all like young kids. Um, and that 2009 point was really interesting because before we raised that money that I mentioned, it was like 100K. We'd actually been in talks with a quite a large accountancy practice around a partnership, and they were going to distribute the software to all of their clients. And we're talking like tens of thousands of clients here, and that would have been this absolutely game changing deal for us, and it would have meant there was a huge amount of a lot of considerable, a lot of money coming into the business, and so the business would have been profitable from quite an early stage.
Mm.
That was actually when that deal came through. That's when I went to my boss, and I was like doing freelancing work, but I was also working for an agency. And I said to my boss, right, I'm going to, quit my job and I'm going to focus on this full time. And then that deal fell through when,
Oops.
after I had like quit my job, which was a bit scary, right? Because I've got a young family. I've just, quit my job, and this thing, somebody literally said to us, the check is in the post, and the check was not in the post. Then, so there was a bit of like frantic scrabbling around, and then that's when we went out and raised that money. But I think that was one of the. I mean, we had to do that out of necessity. But I mentioned, we raised a number of other investments over the years.
Yeah.
I do think they're probably some of the most difficult decisions that you have to make in terms of, well, do you want to raise money at all? If you do, when, how much, what you're going to do, what you're going to spend it on. They are some of the most difficult decisions I think that you have to make. I mentioned that we did like quite a few different investment rounds, but we never raised huge amounts of money. And I think that's maybe why the approach that we took back then was quite different from the ones that you see a lot of tech companies doing nowadays, where they'll do these crazy like 10 million pound or dollar raises for relatively early stage businesses. We were raising like 100K here, 300K there.
Yeah.
At one point we raised like a million or something, which is again relatively small amounts of money you can take. And so the approach that we took to raising cash was a bit more prudent, and I was a bit more cautious rather than going really, really aggressive. I actually think looking back, we probably could have been, arguably, we should have been more aggressive. I think it might have been better from the business in the long run, but we were so inexperienced, as founders. We'd never run, apart from our freelance and contracting jobs, we'd never run any sort of business before. So it was all totally new for us. We were learning on the job, not just about, trying to build a product and take it to market, but what is building a company actually.
Yeah.
So it was all really new to us. And so we took quite a cautious approach to that. Which in some ways, made a lot of sense at the time. If you'd sort of transported me today, and I think the co-founders back to that point, we would probably be more aggressive than we were, I think.
And do you regret that, do you think? Or
I think it's like, we've done all right. I've had a great time. I've had amazing experiences. I love the company that I have today. And I love what we managed to build. I think you always just, you look back and you think, oh, maybe this would have been different or this would have been different. But I don't have any regrets. I just think that, because I'm a different person now. 18 years on, the things that I know, what I'm capable of, is fundamentally different to how I was in like my early 30s. So it was maybe the right decision for me then, but probably I would maybe do things as today differently.
brilliant. Well, that's really good to understand that. The company has been acquired by NatWest. When did that happen? And how did that happen? Was that them coming to you or you going to them? What
Yeah,
brought
so
that about?
So it happened in 2018. So we've been part of the NatWest group for like over 7 years now. So we had started doing a partnership with them in 2017. They'd actually gone out with quite a wide tender process to like a number of software vendors
Right.
because they wanted to essentially sort of provide tools that were going to help their business banking customers with a wider range of needs, like around cash flow and expense management and all these sort of types of things. So they'd gone out to the market, and we just pitched them like lots of other businesses did, and we managed to win that particular tender. And so we started working with them on a pilot of what that might look like in 2017. And that went well. We had a few hundred business banking customers from, it was called the RBS Group then. It sort of changed its name to NatWest Group now.
Mm.
the RBS group, and that went well. And then like I said we'd gone public in 2016, so we were a publicly listed company at the time. But in 2018, they came to us and said, well, we'd like to take you off of the public market and acquire the business outright. And so that's what we agreed to do that at that time.
So, talking about those tough decisions earlier, was that an easy decision, or was that a tough one to move from? You've got total control of the business, you've got total ownership. Well, not quite total ownership because obviously you'd gone public, but how did that one feel, and how did that? How do you get your kind of sense of where you're going now with that one?
Yeah, I mean, so I think what to unpack there. I think
Mm,
obviously the decision to sell a business is probably one of the most fundamental ones you've ever done. We'd actually been acquired, or we'd actually been approached by a very large, well-known US competitor of ours. If you know the space, you could probably guess who it was. Um, about buying the business some years before, and we effectively
right.
turned down that offer because it didn't feel right. It was a lot of money, we'd have made the
Mm,
founders a lot of money at that time, but it didn't feel right to us as a business. And one of the, thing I remember the conversation that I had, as co-founders, and you set aside the personal gain that you're set to make out of something. You say, you're going to have to, we're going to have to stand up and talk to the whole company and the team on that Monday morning and announce this news. And of course, you have to announce it as a positive thing, right? You just have to
hmm
announce it as a positive thing. That was like, in our heart of hearts, are we actually going to feel that as a positive thing?
hmm
And to me, that's a litmus test. And if you can do that, then great. If you genuinely believe this is in the best interest of the business, then fantastic. That first thing that happened, I was adamant that it was not. I was adamant that it wasn't going to be within the best interest of the business. But when the offer from RBS came in, it was different. I felt, do you know what this is? And we've talked about this in the past. Like being a publicly listed company was actually really difficult. It was probably
hmm
the most challenging period that we had. And I've heard other people who've been on the sub smaller, AIM market talk about this as well. It can be very, very challenging. Um, and there's whole issues around the liquidity of shares because there are much like shares there. But you made the point, oh, you're completely in control. We definitely did not feel that we were completely in control. We very much felt like we were like chasing our tails all the time, becomes very short term focused on growth because you've got, expectations that the market wants you to hit. If you miss those, it can be really bad for your business. So you've got to like focus on those and it can be, it can be quite a stressful sort of like time.
hmm
And so it wasn't like we were really in this position, well, we can do what we want, we can build for the long term. It wasn't like that at all. And so when the offer came in from RBS, it was like, actually, we get to, be part of something which is bigger, have that security there, but we also probably don't have the short-term pressures that we did have when we were on the public markets. And so for that reasons and a bunch of other ones as well, it did feel like it was going to be the right decision for us to make. And like I said, like 7 years later, and yeah, I think it's worked out really, really well.
So what has the acquisition by NatWest meant for the business? What's it done?
I mean, so the business has just scaled hugely since that point. I mean, the team
Right.
size has doubled. I think we're about 130 people at the point we did the acquisition. I say we're 270 now. I don't even know how many customers we had then, but the customer base is significantly more than doubled. We've got 220,000 customers in
Wow.
the UK. And a lot of those are NatWest customers. So, FreeAgent is offered for free for
hmm
business banking customers of RBS or NatWest or Ulster Bank or
Right.
and so it's a great benefit for RBS and NatWest customers, but it's really great for us as well because we have people that want to use a great piece of software for free, and so we've really scaled the business and our customers as a result of that channel for us as well. So it's been very transformative for us.
Again, really helpful. How competitive is the sector? that you are in. You spoke there about almost being acquired by a big competitor from the States. So how competitive is the sector? It is there constant evolution of technology, of regulations, of talk a bit about that.
So it's a hugely competitive sector. I mean, accounting software is just one of these categories that every business needs to do their accounts. And these days, most people will be using some sort of software. The days of people just cobbling together like shoe boxes full of receipts and stuff are sort of thankfully. I mean, it still happens a little bit. You speak to accountants and they'll tell you that, but it is a huge sector and it's dominated. You've had players like Sage in the UK, been around for
Hmm.
decades and decades. Intuit in the US a really big organization, Zero, that originally came out of New Zealand. These are like huge players, multi-billions of dollar cap like companies. And then there's us, who are like this tiny, tiny sort of business in comparison to that. And as well as like a host of other ones as well, especially the UK, it's been massive. So it's a very competitive sector. And when I mentioned before, if I could go back and be more aggressive with the amount of money, that's the reason for it, because we were just in such a competitive arena. And it is something which radically changes all the time. There's been a huge amount of technology change in that time. The regulatory stuff has been huge as well. We're actually just going through this period of real change at the minute. HMRC, this initiative called Making Tax Digital, which is all about them trying to digitize most of the tax submissions for businesses in the UK. And that effectively means that small businesses will have to use accounting software to do that, because they are not going to allow you to do it through the HMRC website anymore. So, it's a big deal for us, obviously, but there's a huge amount, and that's just, there's banking regulation change that impacts us as well. So it's an area which, you might think of it as quite boring as accounting software. It's anything but. And then you get into, AI and what that's going to do for, all different areas of business. But yeah, there's never a dull moment. Funnily.
And thanks for mentioning Making Tax Digital, because I was going to mention that myself, because obviously that's coming down the track
Yeah.
for businesses, and that's going to be a big one that folk need to respond to and do so obviously quite soon. Okay, no, that's really, really helpful. So how do you as a business stay ahead of that curve, of that regulation, of that tech change? How are you making sure that you're ahead of that?
So I think in terms of the regulatory stuff, we work with HMRC really, really closely. We have really great relationships with them. So especially with something like MTD, the main vendors in the space are as much shaping some of the aspects from that, not in terms of like the actual fundamental tax rules, but how it's implemented in terms of the software. So HMRC are very collaborative in that regard with the vendors, because effectively we need to build this thing together, right? I think in terms of just like broader customer expectations, it's just really about staying customer focused as an organization. So it's, big passion of mine. And as I told you, my background was in more of the user research, user experience and design. I was always like really, really strong in that. And that's something I would, try to keep as an organization as we've scaled. So making sure that we speak to customers just all the time, whoever that is, via our customer support channels, or actively outreaching to them to ask what they want from the software. And just being aware of how technology is shifting in general. Obviously, mentioned AI there.
Mm.
One of these things where, nobody quite knows the impact it's going to have. But you've almost got to just like start down that path and start experimenting with it, start exploring what it can do. And then you're going to sort of like find use cases and you're going to see what comes of it.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks for that, Ron. And just a reminder to our audience, if you have any particular questions you want to ask, do pop them into the chat, and we'll try and get to those. So thank you. Okay, let's move on a wee bit. You you spoke earlier there, Rowan, about in the very early days, you were inviting a small group of potential customers to beta test, to play with the product and see if there was things that they might comment on. Is that, has that, and you spoke there yourself just about that user testing, user experience. Are there any examples of a feature or the business pivoting that was directly inspired by customer feedback?
I mean, I think, I mean, almost everything we do is inspired by customer feedback. I think so. I think what, a couple of points. I think in those early days, those very early days, because we were either freelancers or contractors, we had a pretty good idea of what we needed as individuals because we were the users for the product, and that was great in some sense. In the fact that, oh, okay, this is how we work, and we have a really good understanding of the area. And we were able to make loads of really good progress because it's called dog fooding. You're building something that you're going to use yourselves, and we did. We used it for our own businesses for many years.
Hmm.
I think where it only gets you so far. And some of the mistakes that we made quite early on was assuming everybody worked in the same way that we do. Like as I mentioned, Ed was a contractor and he worked on these quite long-term contracts. There were
Hmm.
contracts that were like several months. And he did quite a lot of work for an organization. He'd be like invoicing them monthly, and that's how he worked. And a lot of the sort of core workflows of FreeAgent were originally built around that sort of concept. But then when we started getting other types of businesses, like retail businesses on, or even just other it's completely different types of businesses, they just didn't work in that way at all. It didn't make sense. And so there was a number of sort of assumptions that we'd made about workflows and the core product features and things that we then had to say, actually, do you know what? This is not how everybody else is working. So I think drawing on your own personal experience can be really useful, but it's not a complete and utter substitute for going out and talking to customers because you're just going to get alternative ideas and perspectives on things. So these days, whenever we're building something, we have our product teams, and we will spend a lot of time in that ideation phase of going out to customers and talking to them about. We do loads around helping customers get paid quickly and payments and all that sort of stuff. And we will do lots of things like, we will talk to our support team. Our support team are incredible at FreeAgent, and they obviously spend all of their time like talking to customers and on the front lines, and so they will be hearing frustrations from people, and they'll be hearing feedback from people and stuff. So that gets fed into the product development process, and we'll also be proactively reaching out to customers to do beta tests. So we still beta test lots of features even to this day. It's obviously just on a smaller scale. It's an individual feature as opposed to the whole product.
No, brilliant. Um, you again, you can you'd spoken earlier about that experience of a large company looking to potentially buy you, and you said it didn't feel right, which to me kind of suggests that there's perhaps values that you have as the founders. What values would you say have remained central to FreeAgent's culture since that founding? And how do you maintain those as the company has grown?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think so. I think so. We've got sort of our values at FreeAgent Day. We have three sort of like main values, which are like own it, be proud of it, and enjoy it. And what I always say is that being a founder is a real privilege. To all the amazing experiences that got to had over the last sort of like 18 years. But one of the really great things about being a founder is that you get to build a type of company that you want to work for. And that's like an amazing privilege. Like you think about all
Mm,
the jobs you've had in the past where like, oh man, this sucks. I have to do this. And it's like, it's not great. But if you're a founder of a business, it's your fault if it sucks, right? So you've got the responsibility of making that like a good company. And that's a big responsibility. But if you get it right, it can be incredibly rewarding. And it can really sort of, it's one of the things I'm probably most proud of as an organization. And partly that's just about having an organization full of really great people who are nice to each other and want to work together. I mean, that's like a huge part of it. So, we talk about enjoy it as one of our core values, and we want people to have a good work-life balance. We want people to be, kind and respectful and collaborative to each other when they're working at Free Agent. So that's a real part. I think we're genuinely like a nice bunch of people and a nice place to work. Our other sort of values that I mentioned there, the own it one, which is about encouraging people to take ownership of their work, but
Hmm.
also about encouraging people that is more about the impact from their work rather than just the busy work aspects of it. So it's easy to go on a job and just, oh, I'm super, super busy here for like 8 hours, whatever it is, and actually not really get very much done. Whereas we really much value and measure success by what was the impact that you had from that work, the impact on the business or the impact on customers. How have you improved our customers' lives through the work that you've done? And accountability is actually quite a big part of that as well, which sometimes sounds a little bit like a scary word, but really it's just about saying, we want to have this impact, we're going to measure that. So you need to be very data driven as an organization and really sort of make that a priority. So that's one of our core values. And then the other one, as I mentioned, was just being proud of your work. And I think that has helped us to, when I talk about that competitive landscape, and we were really this tiny organization going up against these much, much bigger ones. Part of the reason that we have been successful is because of the quality of work that we do across all different parts of the organization. We're very much recognized as having, the best experience of probably any product on the market. We, without a shadow of a doubt, deliver the best customer support. And so that idea of like, you want to come to work, yeah, you want to work hard, but you want to leave work every day saying, I'm proud of what I did today. I'm proud of the work that I produced. And I think that's actually one of the things that, along with that culture of, making sure that it's a great work environment, is one of the things that keeps people wanting to show up and work for you.
Brilliant. Um, what advice would you give to someone in Scotland that was thinking about starting a tech, in fact, any business, but a tech business? If somebody was starting, what advice would you give to them?
So I think it's about think about the people that you surround yourself with. And I sort of just use that term quite loosely, and that obviously that could mean, your co-founders, if you've got them, or it's your early employees, your early hires, or it's just the wider support network that you've got, either as a professional support network or even just as a personal support network. I think that it can be quite a scary, can be quite a lonely thing starting a business, and there's a huge amount of risk involved in it as well. So I think to have as much as possible people there just to give you emotional support, I think is really important. But people you can talk to, you can bounce ideas off. We were quite lucky. I mean, obviously we had three co-founders, and that was quite a strong team. And then quite early on, we brought in a couple of other senior hires around sales and marketing, which were sort of areas that we were weaker in. But our first investor, a guy called Christoph Jans, was quite a well-known angel investor in the European sort of like tech scene. And he used to do these meetups where you fly out to Berlin or something in San Francisco, and you would meet other tech companies who were at various stages along the journey. Some of them were further ahead than you, other ones were just starting out, but you were having a chance to have these conversations with people who, and it was amazing that everybody had the same problems, even though you're
Hmm.
like some Silicon Valley sort of like scale up tech business, or somebody that's in, I don't know, Berlin who's just starting out, and everybody has the same sort of issues and worries and things. And just being able to sort of like, meet those different people and share that stuff, and then find out that you're not alone, is really comforting. And you can learn a huge amount through that process as well. So I think just think about how you're building your support network.
And that kind of plays into a question we've had there in the chat. The question was, was there any networks or support that you found particularly useful when trying to scale that you would recommend to others starting out? So you've kind of touched there on as the question I asked you, which was about advice for someone starting a business. But in terms of scaling that business, are there any networks or support that you found particularly useful, or is it the same kind of thing? What's your thoughts on that?
So I think what was interesting, if you go back to like 2006, 2007, there wasn't a lot of tech companies in Scotland. There really wasn't. It was very, very early on. You think, you had, Skyscanner,
Hmm.
Andrew, another one who started effectively, I think around the same sort of time as you, but there wasn't a big tech ecosystem and there wasn't a big tech community in Edinburgh or Scotland like there is today. And so when I talk about those support networks, we were literally going to America, we were going to Europe.
Right.
It was like, and we were doing that through investment communities that we built up and relationships that we built up with the founders. So we were actively having to, try and go there. I think it's very different today. I think the ecosystem in Scotland has improved significantly. I don't think it's perfect. I think there's a long way still to go, but I think it is better than it's ever been. And I know there are like not a number of communities that are out there for different sectors. Obviously, I know that sort of like the tech sector quite well, and there's things like tech scalers and
Yeah.
Codebase and sort of things like that that do a fantastic job at supporting people to that. As part of, in NatWest, we have the accelerators and
Yeah.
that sort of lots of communities that kind of grow around that. So I think there was lots more options than there was when we were starting out. But yeah, for us, it was like we really had to. We were lucky enough to find a community of other tech businesses through the investors that we had.
Yeah. No, and RBS was a very early supporter of the entrepreneurial spark model of that kind of,
Yeah,
incubator and accelerator kind of idea. And I know RBS is also, alongside the government, being a huge champion of Scottish Edge, which it's a competition, a very tough competition to get
I've one of
money.
the judges on it this year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But a brilliant, brilliant idea. Has been going for a number of years now, and it's superb. And I'm always impressed by
it
what they do, and we're a big supporter of that.
was
Um,
fantastic. The
yep.
business that came through this year, I'm blown away by some of the businesses that come out of that.
Okay. So you've kind of touched there on where the ecosystem is now. Um, would you say there are advantages or indeed challenges of running a tech company from Scotland?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is. So I think there are good things in Scotland. I think there's some great universities. There's some great talent in Scotland, that comes out of some of the universities. Obviously, like Edinburgh has been a great hub for some of that stuff, but some of the other ones, Glasgow, and some other ones as well, has been good. So I think there's a really great legacy and heritage of innovation in Scotland. Going back hundreds of years. We are a small nation, and we're certainly from some of the aspects of things around investment and financing and funding, we're not as mature and well developed as other countries out there. You'll probably know that a few years ago there was a commission completed by Mark Logan, who did a review of the Scottish tech ecosystem, the Logan Review. I was actually on the advisory board of that, and that really looked at it was a really good piece of work that looked across all aspects of the pipeline of innovation and building companies within Scotland, from like early education through to university education, through to startup, through to scale up, funding, exit, all of those, the entire
Yeah.
pipeline. And really looked at sort of like all the things that you need to have at each point in that to essentially reach a tipping point, a critical mass of a self-sustaining ecosystem that's going to grow and grow and grow. Now, we're not there yet in Scotland compared with some other things, and there's a number of factors for that. So I think there are some challenges around being in Scotland, but like I say, I think there is incredible talent. There is a lot of support from organizations like Business Gateway, some of the things that you mentioned before. There is support out there, and so if people can tap into that, then I think it can be a great thing. I think as well as like the one the one thing that I think stands out, if you, for example, have spent quite a lot of time in America and the West Coast, and there's a huge when talk to entrepreneurs out there, there's just a level of ambition that's almost frightening. Like they really do just have this kind of like mindset, which is like every single thing is going to be the next $1 billion sort of like company that they're doing. And we were a bit more, I think we were a bit more cynical with Scots, you know, we're a bit more, but at the same time, I think we're just, it's less stressful. We're a bit more chilled out here. You know, we do value that balance of work life much more than, you know, they do in some other places. And so, you know, I think there's a lot to be said for just the culture around Scottish or Scotland in general, but I think companies in Scotland, and I think that's it's something that when people come to Scotland, they're like, wow, this is like amazing, you know, and you really take care of your staff and you really look after people, and at the same time you want to do good, you want to do something that's going to benefit our society compared to this like simply just making a quick buck.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's still, to some degree, a kind of cultural issue in Scotland, and it's that the way I describe it is, you know, a Kentish feather. You know,
Yeah.
it's that way where, oh, don't you stick your head above the parapet because we know where you came from. You know, it's that kind of, and I definitely think it's changing, but I think it's still there to some extent. The other challenge we have, I think, not just in Scotland, but is the UK. And I've heard this a number of times that in America, or rather in Britain, you know, if you go bankrupt, which is an inevitable part of trying to build a business for you know, sometimes just the
Mhm.
challenges are such, it doesn't work. And if you're bankrupt, you're frowned upon. And in America, after you've been bankrupt 5 times, they say you're beginning to understand how a business works. So it's a different culture, it's a different approach at the end of
Yeah.
the day. So hopefully we can change that culture. We can, through things like Scottish Startup Month, we can get folk, get it into their mindset and their head, you know, entrepreneurialism, being an entrepreneur, being a founder, it's a good thing. It's challenging, it's tough, it's difficult, but it's a good thing to try.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, it's been one of the most rewarding things that, you know, I've ever done in my life, and it's given me the opportunity to learn so much. And I think that's always the thing which I sort of, you know, as a business, you've always got to be optimizing for, and that's how quickly are you learning? You know, as a startup, really, you live or die by the ability to learn and adapt,
Hmm.
you know, market to your customers, to competition, whatever it is. And so you're right, you know, you're going to fail, you're going to make mistakes, you know, things aren't always going to work out well, but it's how quickly you can learn from that. That's the key measure, I think.
What have you learned about yourself?
Probably that I'm capable of doing a lot more than I thought I was. That's probably the one. That's I think why, you know, from a personal perspective, it was so transformative for me. You know, we in the early days, we you know, like we always used to joke. Or we don't want to run a 50-person business. And we were like, no, that sounds like that's going to be a nightmare. I don't want to do that. And then we got to 40 people, right? Do you know what? It's not that bad. You know, but we don't want to run a 100-person business. We don't want to do that. And we got to like 90 people, like, do you know what? Maybe it was, and so there was this constant like leveling up of where,
Yeah,
no, maybe we could do that. Maybe we could. And it's maybe that slightly Scottish thing of always sort of being a bit down on ourselves, or
yeah,
I'm not sure, but you know, being able to sort of constantly challenge ourselves and
yeah,
prove ourselves wrong, and so we can do more and more. That's for my own, I guess, confidence. That was a very transformation because nowadays I'm kind of like thinking, if I don't think I can do something, well, I know I've proved myself wrong in the past. So
mhm,
even though I may not have the confidence to do it today, I know that if I just work hard and I learn and I try my best at something, then I'm probably going to be okay. And that's actually quite a sort of that, you know, from a personal perspective, that's quite a transformative thing.
mhm. Fascinating. We talked there a wee bit about, you know, culture and so on. Has being based in Scotland influenced Free Agent's identity or culture or approach to doing business?
I mean, I think it's absolutely influenced by our culture. You know, your culture is just like the team that you have. And so, you know, we've essentially not everybody's based in Scotland, but like a lot of the people are. And so it's definitely influenced by that, I think. I mean, you know, we serve customers all over the UK, so we're not
Yeah.
Our customer base isn't massive. We have a lot of people in Edinburgh, just as you might imagine, because we'll go a bit more of a profile here, in Scotland more generally. But we have customers all over the UK. But I think from a cultural perspective, I think it definitely has been impacted by that.
Yeah. I meant to kind of explore this a wee bit earlier when we were talking about the kind of tough decisions to make. You've talked about investment rounds, and actually we've had a question in which has reminded me of what I was going to ask you there. The question we've got is, when making those early step ups in funding rounds, how did you judge what was a fair balance of investment versus the equity of the company you gave up to angels? And I was thinking earlier about the question of that tough decision. How much of the business would you give up for the funding that you got? So basically that's the kind of question that we're going to ask there. So how do you judge what's a fair balance of investment versus the equity of the company you've given up to angels?
There's one thing. So I haven't raised money. We haven't raised money for quite a long, long time. So I don't know how much of this is out of date. So I'd kind of preface that. One thing I would say is that one of the things that we learned early on is that the way founders look at investment and the way that investors look at investment is quite different. They have a very different mindset. So as a founder, what you're really thinking about is, I don't want to give up too much of my business, right? That's the kind of thing for you. But the investor isn't thinking about that. They're not thinking, I want to take as much of that business. That's not their mindset. Their mindset, and you have to think about how business models work for investors, is they do lots and lots of investments, right? They split across a big portfolio, and they know that the majority of those investments are going to fail or at least not succeed very well. But they know a handful of them will become very, very successful. So all they're really interested in is getting those handful of investments that are really successful. And so essentially, investors, in my experience, don't haggle so much over investment valuation, because the investment valuation at what point they come in doesn't make that much of a difference if your company sells for $10 billion, right? What matters is how much of the business that they have. So there's the variables that you have there. There's the amount of equity you're giving up and the valuation of the business, at that point. And so really, typically what you tend to find is that investors come in and they will want 10 to 15% of your business for an investment, right? I mean, that'll be different if you've got an angel round and you've got a number of smaller players coming in. But typically for a VC player or a larger round, we would be in that region of 12 to 15% of the business that you were effectively selling.
Yeah.
And then you're then thinking about, okay, what is the valuation of the business for that particular round? So it was, any less than that, if you're talking about only 5%, at some point it's not interesting enough for the investor coming in, because when the sale happens, they're not going to have enough of that to be able to sort of justify the kind of the. So they think much more about that's how much of they want. And actually, in our experience at least, they're prepared to be more flexible in the valuation. So that's my experience.
No, thank you for that. We talked, you spoke earlier there about what the ecosystem was like when you were getting going, all that, those years ago, and where it is now. And obviously you've said it's not perfect yet. There's still work to be done on that. So do you see opportunities for more tech innovation in Scotland? And is there a role that established businesses could play in that? So thinking about what you'd said there about it isn't quite as good as it could be, how do we make it better?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned the Logan report, before, and I thought that was one of the sort of main recommendations of that. One of the, I guess, the observations from that report is that you really do need to have more of a pipeline of investment and funding coming into a country, because essentially what you do is you get this self-sustaining ecosystem where you're able to scale up a number of companies. Again, many of those will fail, but some will become successful. The ones that do become successful, if they exit, many of the people from those companies that exited will then go on and either invest in other local businesses, or they will spin out and start their own startups. And you've seen that with
Yeah,
acquisitions from places like Skyscanner and
yeah,
like FreeAgent. People go on and start their own businesses after they've been with a larger, more successful so like scale up. And then you get this flywheel effect, right? But you do need to make sure that you have all the components to that. And I think that where we probably struggle with in Scotland at the minute is early stage investment, that seed, pre-seed investment sort of rounds. So I think that's the one area where I think we maybe still like struggle a little bit to have really strong investment, which is founder friendly.
hmm,
That's one of the other thing you think about some of those places that were mentioned, like in the US and things like that, where that's quite from an investment point of view, can be quite competitive, which can be good for
yeah.
founders because they have lots of options. It's maybe not like that still in Scotland, so I think that's one of the areas where it can make a difference.
No, that's really helpful. Okay, I mean, you've mentioned Skyscanner a couple of times. What folk might not be aware of is that Skyscanner originally got off the ground, if I can use that terrible pun, with support from Business Gateway. So who knows? All those folks out there that we helping every year, maybe there's a few more unicorns in there, which would be wonderful. Roan, listen, we've covered an awful lot of ground this afternoon. A huge thank you from me to you for your answering those questions and for expanding on the journey that FreeAgent and yourselves have had over the years. That's been incredibly useful. Thanks to everyone who's joined us this afternoon. Sally, my colleague, has put the feedback form in the side panel there in the questions. So I am going to draw a wee line under that just now. And as I say, Rowan, much appreciated. And we will hopefully see folks again on our next panel webinar. Take care, everyone. Look after
Fantastic. Thank
yourselves.
you.
Cheers for now.